Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical strategies of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, executive and life coach Meredith Oak, with a quick reminder that podcasts are conversations, not consultations, and definitely not medical advice. We're here for informational purposes only. To follow up with our amazing guests, please do check out the show notes. And to stay in the loop with the QBC podcast, join our email list, also linked in the show notes. If you're not on our email list, I highly recommend going to qbcpod.com and jumping on that email list immediately. We are doing lots of fun events with past podcast guests coming on to do talks and answer your questions and do lots of interactive stuff, which podcasts, as much as I adore them, are not. They're not terribly interactive. So we're trying to provide that venue for you. If that sounds fun, make sure you're on the email list. If you are on the email list and you don't know what I'm talking about, go to your inbox and put Quantum Biology Collective in the search, and it's probably went to our emails are probably going somewhere where you're not seeing them, which happens a lot. But do make sure you're getting them because there's lots of fun things going on, and I would love to see you all there. Okay, today I have Dr. Francisco Gutierrez, who is a physician. He was on the podcast last year. He has a really unique perspective. He was born and grew up and went to medical school in El Salvador, and then moved to the United States to do his residency and has had his full medical career in the United States, and now has sort of come out the other end and has a private independent practice outside of the system. It's a really interesting story. He goes deep into it in our first interview, and he gives us the highlights in this interview coming up right now. So I really, really enjoy talking to Francisco. He's a lovely person, and I just love his perspective on everything. He's really come to a place that is just so wise and so interesting. So we also get into a topic that I don't normally cover, which is a pharmaceutical intervention that is very heavily prescribed at the moment. And I usually like to focus on the things that we want more of in our lives, how to optimize our environment. And I don't get into the weeds on that kind of stuff because I want us to stay focused on what we want in our lives. However, in this situation, I think it's really, really worth being very well educated and well versed on this drug. And the drug that I am referring to is statins. So I started noticing that a lot of my friends were getting prescribed this drug, which made no sense to me. And so I was chatting with Francisco on Zoom one day, and he started explaining to me why that's happening and what's really going on and what the drug is actually doing in our bodies and all of the things. And I thought, you know what, this just even as a public service announcement, it's really, really important because chances are you all know people who are on this, whether it's your friends, your parents, yourself, and it's worth having a conversation. I normally don't take a stand on these things. I think, we need to figure things out with our doctor. But in this case, the reality of what this drug does and what its outcomes are, and the story that doctors are being told and then telling their patients is so far apart. I don't know how to say this. It's really worth understanding what's going on in this particular situation. So we went deep and we covered it all. And I was not amused by the situation. I think it's really, it's bad. It's pretty bad. But again, some things it's worth knowing about so that we can make good decisions and support the people in our lives to make good decisions. And Dr. Gutierrez is such a calm, lovely person that he walks me through and walks you through the whole situation so that we can have some clarity and some peace in terms of what we choose to do with our bodies. All right. Oh, and don't forget to visit my friends at bondcharge.com and put QBC in the little box at checkout to receive a nice little discount. Enjoy. Dr. Francisco Gutierrez, coming to us from your homeland of El Salvador. Welcome back to the QVC podcast.
Hi, Meredith. Wonderful to be here. Yes, I am out here in this beautiful weather. I understand they had a significant rainfall for a few days just prior when we arrived on the 20th of November. So I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be with you.
Amazing. And tell us a little bit. So you grew up in El Salvador and you emigrated to the United States. You practiced medicine here. You worked in hospital administration. You did the whole deal, worked your way through the whole medical establishment in the US and came out the other side. Like, give us a bird's eye view. We have, I've done a previous interview with you. So I really recommend people go listen to that. We go deep into your journey, but just sort of let us know the high level trajectory.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So just a brief summary. So I am my specialty is internal medicine. I went to medical school here in El Salvador, graduated in 1994, then went and did my residency and chief residency in New York City, in Staten Island, New York, where I became an internist. And I started my career as basically a solo practitioner within the mainstream medical system in Newport, Rhode Island. And along the way, I've experienced the many changes that my profession has undertaken in the business side and in the clinical delivery side as well. So, as you said, from that experience, I joined a group because of the economic pressures were such that I couldn't make a buck being on my own. And then after that, I was hired by a hospital system where pretty much all the medical care that is rendered here. In the United States. I'm not in the United States today, but in the United States, it's basically out of hospital systems. Every doctor now is practically employed. So I've seen all that transition. I also held leadership positions, semi-executive and executive positions in this hospital system. I was involved in the rollout of many programs that had to do with population health, which is another way of saying how we can save money for the hospital system. And then I left, kind of burnt out. I was out of clinical practice for a couple of years, and then I came back right before the pandemic. I was working in urgent care in the front lines. Along the way here, as I've mentioned before, I dove deep into the rabbit holes of what eventually became quantum biology. Due to my own health issues, I had a stroke very early in this story, and then that led me to understanding mitochondria, at least from the biochemical level. And then after I did more research, it led me to understand mitochondria from the biophysical level and quantum level. So with that background and new knowledge, COVID came, and then after some time, I got sick with COVID. And when I was convalescing, I decided that I wasn't going to go back to the mainstream medical system. Eleanor and I, my wife, decided we're going to do a full reset. So we sold it, pretty much cashed in and everything, and invested in this new venture. It's not new anymore. We're 3.5 years out, and it's called Solimar Direct Health, and it's under the direct primary care business model. It's a membership, and basically, I started from zero again, no patients, and now we're up to almost full panel after 3 years. And what we do there is basically apply the principles of quantum biology to deal with the conditions, or let's say symptoms, of modern life that my profession wants me to give you a pill for.
I love that. There are so many different avenues I want to follow up with you just from that overview. So the first one I'll pick up on is you talked about moving from a biochemical understanding of mitochondria to a biophysical understanding. Could you maybe just expand on that a little bit and tell us sort of what the practical implications of that shift in understanding were for you and your patients?
Sure, absolutely. So I knew the mitochondria basically, as everybody knows the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. So then they tell you that the mitochondria are the organelles that are in charge of making energy, which is not accurate. They don't make energy; they transform energy, right? Okay, but nonetheless, and then they taught me about the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain, and then how that makes ATP. So they kind of bypassed the idea that it also makes water, which is kind of the most important thing of the mitochondria. But then, so I then concentrated on the biochemical side, the Krebs cycle, and how things get, broken down into different substances. And the electron transport chain actually was in the background. I didn't pay too much attention. Then, after listening to Dr. Cruz and reading the papers and the books that he actually recommends to read, finally dawned on me. So electrons are programmed by photons. That's a Nobel Prize from a person that you may know, Albert Einstein. So electrons are programmed by photons. And what the Krebs cycle fundamentally is doing is looking for those electrons and protons to be able to, feed into the electron transport chain to do the ATP and make water. So then it dawned on me, okay, photons, electrons, and protons. That's quantum physics. I got to learn quantum physics, and that's basically how I understood that there is another layer, much more fundamental to the biochemical layer, and I think that's pretty clear now. I think there's data that actually the mitochondria, it really the complex 1, 2, 3, 4 and ATPase actually look quantum processes, particularly proton and electron tunneling, to do what they need to do. So, and the water is important to keep the coherence. So I think that's pretty clearly established now. So from that foundation, then I realized, wow, we have a little bit of the story, but in reality, we're missing the real foundation, the humongous foundation that really is what really matters.
Right, which is the physics piece.
Exactly, the physics. Exactly.
Okay.
Because, also there's a Dr. Wallace. I don't know if you've had him on the show, but Doug Wallace is the mitochondrial world expert, and he every time he talks, he says that the difference between being dead and being alive is energy. So energy is again given by the mitochondria, translated from outside into inside. So the mitochondria are actually very important, because if you don't take care of our mitochondria, if your mitochondria and you don't produce the energy that you need, then that's called dying. That's called essentially is a road to death. So that's the aha moment where I really said, wow, we really need to understand how to take care of our mitochondria. And that's basically how I structured Solimar in a way that it is actually a mitochondrial renovation program that we do there.
Right. Oh, that's a great way to put it, mitochondrial renovation. So basically our environment, all of the signals in our environment, from the light to the mood of the people we spend time with, there's all of these frequencies are affecting our mitochondria. And if we are in a consistent an environment that is consistently depleting the energetic inputs or giving energetic inputs that the mitochondria can't work with, we are basically slowly dying.
That's exactly right. That's
okay.
That's the way I see it. Correct.
Okay. Because I'm interested in this idea of that balance, right? So it's like our bodies are so resilient, and when you start to understand this, you're like, oh my God, how are we all not dead? Like, there's so much coming at us all the time. So we have a capacity to deal with some bad stuff. The more healthy frequency we can surround ourselves with, the better shot our mitochondria have of maintaining that energetic flow and staying healthier long term.
That's right. The guardians of the ship of our resiliency are the mitochondria. They really are. The mitochondria are basically what dictates if we're sick or if we thrive. And again, the mitochondria are quantum antennas that pay attention to a lot of different inputs. So, I came to, not to the realization, I kind of explained from the 10,000 foot view, but I structured our program through through exercise physiology, but let me explain that. We don't really dwell on exercise at all. That's actually the tip of our pyramid. What I mean is, I'm a cyclist, so I'm very interested in endurance physiology, exercise endurance physiology, and there's a lot of talk about how the elite endurance athletes, like professional cyclists, are the healthiest people in the world because they have their most robust and abundance of mitochondria, and that's been shown in clinical studies. So, what from the biochemical level, there's two main. There are many, but there's two main molecules that actually control mitochondrial biogenesis and robustness. One is called PCG1 alpha, and the other one is called AMPK. So these two are completely under circadian control. They're completely under the control of the clock mechanism. So from that standpoint, I said to myself, okay, I have a diabetic who has a very low level of mitochondrial functioning, and that's been shown in that context. And I can't take that diabetic with me to the French Alps and ride 100 miles and 4,000 meters of climbing, but I can fix her body clock. And might that actually be the same as exercise? And I'm going to prove it. This is my theory. This is my
Okay.
And I'm gonna prove it using the technology that an exercise physiologist would use, and we use body composition scanner in the office. So lo and behold, I was right. So I was right by just helping people fix their desynchronized circadian clock. I can show them how their mitochondria function is improving. How? By showing them with a body composition scan that they're reducing their body fat and increasing their muscle without exercise. I have plenty of results that have been given permission to share by my patients if somebody would want those results to be seen, because everybody has this idea that you have to go to the gym and spend an hour and a half and pump iron, and that's the way you're going to make muscle. No, nature makes your muscle.
That is so interesting, because I definitely hear that from everyone I talk to who's adopted a circadian optimized lifestyle. If they were really out of shape, they've lost weight. If they were really in shape, they've gotten even more fit, but work out less.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Exactly. And that brings me, just briefly, I'll mention that because there's two things that really annoy me in how medical care is being promoted. One of them is cholesterol, and we're probably going to talk about that later. But the other one is the idea of calories. If there's one thing that I really want people to remember, is that I help in the bigger context of the world dispel the myth of a calorie and of cholesterol.
Right. Yes. And we're going to get into the cholesterol, because that is leading to, anyway, yes, mass overprescription of statins, which mm-hmm. we will get back to. I did just want to say on this subject of the case studies that you're accumulating. So I can't remember if we talked about this, because we chat and update each other, but we are in the process of getting approved to become a nonprofit entity in the United States. And one of the goals, once that's finished, it would be of the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology, would be to start collecting and creating research and case studies on these topics. So we should keep talking about that, because we could, and then we're looking to, we have our director of research, her name's Nico Kennedy. She's looking at different ways, different avenues for us to publish our findings and publish the case studies.
Oh,
so when you said if anyone's interested, my hand is up.
Absolutely. Pleasure.
Yeah. And if anyone listening has case studies or ideas on that, shoot us an email. Okay. So many interesting things. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more in your practice. You see people like from a variety of different backgrounds in terms of where they were born or where their ancestors were born.
Sure.
And talk to me about some of the things that you recommend for people. You mentioned you had a patient recently who was from the Dominican Republic. So what did you do with that patient? And that was different from probably what any other doctor would do.
Right. So so obviously, you know that I'm a allopathic trained physician, with all this experience, and what is really killing us, for lack of a better word, or making us sick, is this idea of the metabolic syndrome, and I'm sure you probably touched about it. What the metabolic syndrome is, and essentially what the metabolic syndrome, how it's defined, is a condition of phenotypes like high blood pressure, low good cholesterol, high blood sugar, big belly, and high triglycerides. But these are symptoms of something more fundamental. And that something more fundamental is insulin resistance and with high insulin. So that's kind of like the root cause of the situation. So my profession actually wants me to give you a pill or a procedure for what are the symptoms of the metabolic syndrome, which are diabetes, high blood pressure, heart attack, strokes, dementia, and cancer. Okay, so that doesn't work because, that's like putting a Band-Aid on a raw wound. The thing is still going to be festering underneath. So then the way that I approach it is, okay, so people have this insulin resistance and high insulin. Now, there are people now, very famous now, Callie Means and Casey Means, and before then, Dr. Lustig, that concentrate on the food. And it's true. I mean, the food is important, but the food is the easiest thing to fix. And I'll explain why. The more fundamental is to the realization that you can get insulin resistance and fatty liver and high insulin, and with the resulting metabolic syndrome, just by not enough sunlight and too much artificial light. Now, there are many mechanisms, as you explained. What we concentrate on in the office is the mismatch that has been created by the modern environment in our design. Okay, so we, our audience knows, and we are designed to get nourished by by sunlight, the earth, and the water. That's why I call my office Solimar. So now, where does a mismatch begin? Going back, this is a long-winded way of answering your question, but the mismatch begins when your mitochondrial haplotype is mismatched with your environment. Okay, so your mitochondrial haplotype, let's say my mitochondrial haplotype of the person from the Dominican Republic that I mentioned to you, it's a coupled mitochondria. So that mitochondria is expecting sunlight in all its frequencies, 365 days of the year. Now, if you put that person in the 44th North latitude, where I am, that's my residence in Rhode Island, then that's where the mismatch begins, because that mitochondria is not optimized to live in that area. So now, if that person adopts the modern life with, the body clock desynchronization, et cetera, and they get sick, in this specific case that I was explaining to you is a person with psoriasis, which is a autoimmune disease. And this person, a young man, I think he was 28, he when he came to me, he was covered in psoriatic plaques. These are like outgrowths in the skin, but there was not an inch of of his skin that was like healthy. Everything was covered. So and then he had gone to the dermatologist, he had gone to the specialist, and they had given them the standard care, which is like these antibody injections because it's an autoimmune disease. So basically, I told him, look, you're not going to get better here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. that's if you come to me for my advice, I am going to write a prescription for you to go back to the Dominican Republic for a month and a half. If you want, I could write a letter for your employer so you don't get fired. And indeed, I did that. But I told him, but you're gonna follow these steps when you're in the Dominican Republic. And basically, I told him to be outside as much as you can, and we kind of coach him on how to take in the sun appropriately, right? And lo and behold, when he came back, his skin was like a baby, went away. So
wow.
So yeah, I mean, all these things that when you have these perspectives on how the body really works. You said it yourself. We have this built-in resiliency. The body's natural state is to be healthy, and it's doing all it can to be healthy. But we just kept getting in the way by giving it things that are not meant to be given.
Right. That is so interesting. So just to confirm, this person had black skin or dark brown?
Dark brown, yeah. He was a dark brown skin.
Okay. And so completely covered in psoriasis.
Psoriatic plaques, yeah.
Psoriatic plaques. Yeah. Okay. Suffering from psoriasis, covered in the plaques. Went to
the DR for a month and a half.
Following the protocols, going out in the morning, getting daylight sun, going out, blocking artificial light at night, and it completely resolved in a month.
A month and a half.
Yeah, whatever, 6 weeks.
Right.
That's incredible. So my question is, so then when he moved back, has he been able to maintain that by understanding, like, would he do red light therapy or spend more time outside? Like, do you think he can maintain that health at a high latitude?
He can. This happened a few years ago. This happened actually before I started Solimar. I was starting to apply these concepts in my last practice. So I kind of lost touch with him. But I'm pretty sure he at least kept some of what we taught him, because the results were so dramatic. And the answer, more specific to your question, yes. Once you get rid of the disease in the lower latitudes, then you can maintain it at a higher latitude. But now you have to be very careful on what you do. Now you can't go back to doing the things that got you there in the first place. So it's a lot of awareness and education about how these things work.
Right. So you mitigating the blue light, mitigating artificial light at night, doing infrared saunas in the winter, spending time outside, like all of the things, those would be enough to, in somebody who has highly melanated skin, but they're healthy, they could probably maintain that health with these strategies. But some people would do best to go back south and basically reset their system. Is that what happened? Is that what happens in these situations?
Yep. Yeah. So now everybody's different. Obviously, this man was young. I can't remember exactly, but I think he was in his late 20s. So the younger you are, the easier it is, because of mitochondrial heteroplasmy that happens naturally with age. And everybody is different. But the idea is, if you have a couple of mitochondria, you live in a northern latitude, and you get sick in the northern latitude, it is possible to get better, but it's a lot easier to go back to a lower latitude, like inside the 20s, to help if you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. Now, I have to you have to tell you, and I'm in El Salvador at the 13th north latitude. The environment here is like amazing because we have the tropical sun, but the earth is volcanic also. So you have like a you have humongous magnetism, you have humongous solar light, and then there's deuterium depleted water too. I heard I haven't talked to him, but I heard Dr. Cruz say that on a podcast or somewhere that he found deuterium depleted water coming from the earth. So so it's very special. Nonetheless, there's diabetic people here. There's people with Crohn's disease, very rare. There's people with some autoimmune disease. There's people with hypertension. There's people with heart attacks. There's people with cancer and dementia, because we have adopted the modern way of living. We have blue light, air conditioning. People like to be indoors with air conditioning because it can get hot down here. So the idea is to bring education to people to understand that we're meant to be outside. This is our nutrition. It's the sun, the earth, and the water.
Wow. And you and your wife are both from El Salvador. You both grew up there. And do you notice personally a change when you spend more time down south, especially in the winter?
Yes, mostly Eleonora, mostly my wife. She has she gets tinnitus, in especially when we're only when we're in Rhode Island. When we're here, it goes away. And
wow.
and a funny story that we have, one of our best friends is she has rheumatoid arthritis. She's from El Salvador and she lives in Virginia, northern latitude. So she was visiting here a couple of years ago, and then she forgot her. She's on Humira, which is a injection, antibody injection to sort of like quench the immune system. And then she came to me. She said, it was like 2 weeks after she had arrived, and I'm so afraid I didn't bring my Humira with me. And I asked her, well, how do you feel? Oh, I feel great. Then you don't need it. What do you need it for?
Right.
Yeah.
El Salvador is your injection.
That's right. That's what you need. Yeah. All these little anecdotes, but I do agree with you that we should formalize these results into something more publishable, for a lack of a better word. So we have that we can organize it in a more scientific way. So really, the message is stronger.
Yeah, I think it's time, and it's like, I feel like on the one hand we have all of this evidence and research, and then on the other hand there's the paradigm shift. So if you say to someone in an allopathic model, biochemical model, yeah, I send my patients outside and they get better, they're like, I have no context for that to make sense. Then when you introduce a new paradigm, you're like, well, actually, if you look at health this way, it's like, oh, of course that makes sense. Right? If I think we have a two-pronged approach ahead of us: the research and the evidence, and laying out a framework that allows people to make sense of the research and evidence.
Exactly. And I'm encouraged because I think there are more and more studies in the literature that have been performed recently that actually speak to what we're saying in a more global way. So we know about the Swedish study that found out that the more sun-seeking behavior someone had, the less likely you were to die of any cause, particularly cardiovascular disease. Just recently, I read a study that this is from the UK Biobank that actually showed they measured the artificial light exposure of 89,000 people. I mean, this is not like, an N of one. And this was not like questionnaires. This was like actually measure the artificial light exposure via some type of wearable. And they found that the people that had the greatest artificial light exposure, especially at night, had up to 35% greater mortality of all cause. And on the other side, people that had the most sun exposure, which they did not quantify, had up to 35% less mortality of all cause. And they went as far as to say that too much artificial light exposure actually shortens your life by about 5 years. It's like smoking.
Wow.
So this is crazy. I mean, this is like,
it really is.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. Like, not going in the sun is as bad as smoking, and getting too much artificial light at night is as bad as smoking.
You got it.
And nobody smokes anymore. I would never do that.
Exactly. You got it. Absolutely.
Wow.
But the point is, that there are more and more people wanting to study these concepts, and it's hard because the medical industry alone, as it is in the United States, is $4.4 trillion. So that's kind of like the I wouldn't call it the enemy, but what we're up against, for as far as paradigm shifting. So it has to come from the patients themselves,
Right. Yes. And that's the message I hear over and over from doctors, is that they're not incentivized to switch paradigms. They're not incentivized to find other solutions besides prescriptions. And they're busy and they're tired and they're in debt and they're like, I'm just going to do my job.
Right. I can speak to that very briefly. When I was in my previous life in a leadership of quality outcomes for one of the measures or the objectives was diabetes. So the quality was not if I improve the patient's diabetes as evidenced by lowering the blood sugar. The quality is if I was using metformin or whatever, Ozempic or whatever drug. If you were using the drugs, then that you hit the checkbox for quality, irrespective of what the disease was doing. It's insane.
So the outcomes were measured by pharmaceutical prescription, not by improvements in the patients. Is that, exactly. Am I hearing that properly?
I heard it properly. That's exactly right.
That's insane.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, the whole structure is basically saying we don't care if you get better. We just care if we get you on the right medication according to our manual.
That's exactly right. According to the experts who, oh, by the way, they get paid by the people that make these medications.
It's so crazy. I really try to stay out of conspiracy theories, but this is not a theory. This is what is actually happening, and doctors are super clear about it and have explained it to me personally many times and talk about it a lot. And you mentioned Casey and Callie Means, they're really exposing this as well.
Yeah, sure.
It's like the entire industry has shifted from one focused on getting you better to one focused on getting you drugged.
Well, that's the business model, right? I mean, I don't think I'm being controversial here. I mean, I'm just telling you the facts as I live them. More than 25 years of experience, and not only live them. I was in charge of these programs, so that was one of the reasons why I left.
I was going to say why you're no longer doing that. Yeah. Tell me what it was like, because I'm sure there were moments where you had opinions about this process. And I'm referring to creating policies focused on outcomes that involved prescriptions versus outcomes that involved improvements in the patient. So was there even room to have an opinion about that? Or what happened if you tried, or anybody tried? Like, what is that environment like to work in?
No, I mean, you either are with them or you're against them. So you really run a significant risk. I mean, you can voice your opinion here and there, but I mean, these are things that are, and the major obstacle is really boils down to money. All these measures, as I live them, were tied to bonuses. So if you hit certain metrics, as one that I described, then you at the end of the year your bonus would be bigger than if you didn't. So that is a big obstacle because everybody wants to make money. Everybody wants to, have a live, especially when you mentioned it. If you're a young doctor, you're getting your feet wet. You don't have the track record that someone like me has the experience. You're just there to do what you were taught, and then you have this humongous student loan debt, $400,000. You really need to make a buck, So that all these things are conspiring against people actually having, doing what, or having a critical thinking to be able to stand up against all these things. We really get indoctrinated, for lack of a better word. I was. I was there. I was one. I was one that thought that the prescription pad was a solution. That's it. What changed my view was my own stroke, because I had to ask myself the question, why did this happen if I'm doing the thing that they tell me to do? And the other question I asked myself is, how I had a stroke at 41 years old, and how can I help people prevent a stroke if I didn't know why I had my own stroke in the first place? Those are the questions I asked myself back then, and then that's what really set me on my journey.
Wow.
And it was a process. This is a decades process, not the next day. This is a process.
Yes. And that makes sense. Most of us, our journeys are gradual. We learn something new, try it out, like, oh, okay. And then add a little, and, it's an evolution for sure. So, and I think the thing that's also really difficult about this is that sometimes drugs can save lives. Sometimes drugs can drastically improve the quality of someone's life. Sometimes we really need a surgery. Absolutely. And when all those things become a blunt instrument, and we take away the freedom for a doctor to discern and investigate when and what to do for the best possible outcome, it's like, at the end of the day, we're not helping anybody, even the drug companies, right? Like if they're just focused on short-term profit, what's going to happen is like what's happening with the media. It's like, we don't believe you anymore. Yep. And then we might also lose some of the benefits that they're bringing to us because they've trashed their credibility.
Absolutely. I prescribe medications. It's not like I'm against medications, but I know how to do it. I know how to prescribe a medication. As simple as a blood pressure medication, people need to have informed consent of what it is that they're putting in their bodies. It's not like these things are they're. You can see it in the direct to consumer commercials, right? They're sold like the biggest discovery in the world, but at the end they tell you in 50,000 ways that they can kill you.
Yeah, I know. It's like, my son has been watching football lately, so I've been hearing commercials, which I don't normally have in my life. Yeah, and they're like, take this drug. It's going to change everything. It's the thing you've been waiting for. By the way, you might start bleeding out your bum and die.
And then they tell you, if that happens, talk to your doctor. What am I?
Right. So, yes. And I think, you started out independent and you've come full circle back and created a situation for yourself where you have the freedom to use your skills and your knowledge to make the best choices for each patient on a case-by-case basis without the pressure of pulling out the pad as the first and only course of action. So, okay. So we were talking about focusing in on one drug in particular that has become in your massively overprescribed due to this structure that you just outlined for us, where doctors are basically evaluated on how many prescriptions they give. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to ask you about this drug particularly, and I'm talking about statins.
Okay.
Because I had heard like they were overprescribed, and I had heard this and that, and I just figured, yeah, like everything else. But I had a friend, a very healthy, active woman in her 50s. She has a job she enjoys. She has strong relationships. She's one of the most physically active people I know. Like, this is a person I'm like, oh, how was your day? She's like, well, I walked the dog for an hour, and then I biked 10 miles, and now I'm going out for a paddleboard. Like, she eats well. Like, she's a very robust, healthy person. And she shared with me, I don't have permission, so I'm not going to give any defining details here. But basically, her doctor was like, oh, your cholesterol's going up a little. I'm putting you on a statin. And when she told me that it became real for me, right? It became out of the realm of statistics that I'd heard about, and it became real. And I was like, I mean, I didn't say anything because it's not my area and I'm not a doctor, but in my mind, I thought, why? Mm-hmm. Why is that happening? What is it? Like, this person is, there are so many other ways to address like a slight increase in cholesterol. And my understanding is that is common as part of a menopausal process anyway. And why is everyone being put on statins? Like, as the the second their cholesterol changes even slightly. Why? Help me.
Yes, I can help you. There's a lot to unpack there with the cholesterol story. I'll try to be brief and so people can understand. So, what is cholesterol? Cholesterol is a vital substance. Okay, if you don't make cholesterol, you die. Basically, okay. There are some babies that are born without the ability to make cholesterol. They last 10 minutes and they're dead. So when I was learning about cholesterol back, in medical school, they were explaining to me how good cholesterol is. Cholesterol forms 80% part of your brain, is part of the cell membranes in every cell. They're the backbone for cortisol, vitamin D, testosterone, estrogens. I always said to myself, wait a second, if cholesterol is so good, how come it's so bad? I mean, it's like, it didn't make any sense to me then. And it turns out you have to go back a little bit in history. There was a man, his name was Ancel Keys. He was an epidemiologist, and at the time society was concerned because Eisenhower had a heart attack. So and the upticks of heart attacks kept going up. So this guy set his sights on finding the root cause of heart attacks, and he published a very famous study called the 7-country study, where he correlated the consumption of saturated fats with the risk of heart attacks. Okay. Now, the problem with that is that it wasn't a 7-country study. It was a 23-country study, and he just chose the 7 countries that fit his presupposed hypothesis. So then they discovered this particle called LDL. Okay, they could measure, and then he had a smoking gun. Because it was found that high LDL correlated with the incidence of heart attacks and et cetera. So if you eat saturated fat, your LDL is going to go up. So therefore, if LDL causes heart attacks, that's your smoking gun. Saturated fats, when you eat saturated fats, that's the reason why you get heart attacks. And then based on that study, we had he was very influential with government, this guy Ancel Keys. But we had this pyramid of, the food pyramid, where they asked the food industry to take out 10% of saturated fat, but they replaced it with sugar. Now, at the same time, so I'm not going to say that was the only reason for the rise in chronic disease, because at the same time, what was happening too was all these, cell towers and, more artificial light, et cetera. So it's a combination of things. It's not just diet, but it's important to understand the context of where this cholesterol thing came out. Now, what happens is that later for a few years they didn't have a good way of giving a medicine to lower cholesterol. So a few of them came out, but in the mid to late 1980s, the first statin was manufactured, and that was a very powerful drug to lower the LDL. So cholesterol, when a doctor sends a lipid panel, we typically measure total cholesterol, which is totally worthless. But then we measure the HDL, which is considered the good cholesterol, quote unquote, and LDL, which is considered the bad cholesterol, along with triglycerides. So these drug statins were shown to be very powerful in lowering the LDL, the bad cholesterol. And it turns out they did clinical studies and they showed that, in fact, they reduced it. And these studies have been repeated by about 30 to 35%. So they're beneficial by 30 to 35% in reducing the composite endpoints of cardiovascular death, heart attacks, strokes, revascularization. So the clinical trials are structured in a way that they basically pool all these things, and then they measure the relative risk reduction based on that. The problem is, okay, so that is the idea of how cholesterol became to be demonized because of this man Ansel Keys that I told you. His study was completely flawed, and also how he was influential in government, and the food industry actually took down the cholesterol, and they did see the statins reduced a relative risk, but at the same time, the chronic disease of diabetes, et cetera, kept going up. The problem is this: statins are a mitochondrial poison. Okay, they're a mitochondrial poison. We started this conversation saying that the mitochondria is the reason why we're not dead. And I said that when you have dysfunctional mitochondria progressively, that's called dying. So how is it that a mitochondrial poison is actually beneficial? So that's what really took me into the rabbit holes to sort of like understand how this really works with statins. So this is what happens with clinical trials when they're sponsored by the people that make the drug, and there's a law here that they own the data. So if you, Meredith, if me, Francisco, wants to ask them for the raw data so we can do the examinations independently, they get to say no. Okay? So we're stuck with what we see. They report the trials in relative risk. So that means they're comparing the results to a placebo given an endpoint. In this case, the endpoint is not even one endpoint. It's like a composite. It's a conglomerate of endpoints. But what you really want to know is, what is the absolute risk reduction? Because you, Meredith, I'll grant them, okay, I can lower your risk of heart disease and stroke by a third, okay, relative risk. But a third of what? If your absolute risk is 1%, so what's 35% of 1%? Right? So now I went from 1% to 0.75%. Now, does that justify me giving you a mitochondrial poison? Maybe, but you need to know that, right? I mean, the decision is...
Right. Back to what you said about informed consent.
Exactly.
I need to buy into that choice.
Exactly. So now, in 2022, there was a big study that kind of upended even their own researchers. They did a meta-analysis of 23 of the most important clinical trials that determined that statins were beneficial. But they wanted to tease out, instead of a composite end, they separated the ends in death of all cause, myocardial infarction, and stroke. But then they also went further, and they wanted to see what the absolute reduction really was giving somebody a statin. And what was cool about that study is that they pooled both primary prevention, meaning people that don't have evidence of the disease, as long as secondary prevention, which is considered a malpractice if I don't give somebody with established cardiovascular disease a statin. So you know what they found? They found the absolute reduction for all-cause mortality was only 1.3%. The absolute reduction for stroke was, I think, 0.4%, and the absolute reduction for heart attack was like 1.9% or something. So you're talking about a very low benefit when you look at absolute risk, And what they found even that's more striking is that any benefit that they found did not correlate with the actual lowering of the cholesterol, meaning that so the benefit was independent of whether the statin lowered your cholesterol or it didn't lower your cholesterol. So your friend should by no means take a statin because there is absolutely no data. There's no evidence at all that a woman of any age, but a woman benefits from taking a statin for primary prevention. There's no evidence, and people can fact check me on this because I've tried to look for it, and there's no evidence. In fact, to make people make better decisions around this. There is a website called VNNT, so it's THENNT.com. So we talk about percentages, but there's another way to demonstrate the benefit or not benefit of a given intervention, such as a statin. Okay. So when you look at the NNT means the number needed to treat, which means I want to find an outcome utilizing this intervention. How many people do I have to treat with this intervention to prevent the outcome I'm looking to prevent? Okay. So does that make sense?
Yes. So in order for a provider to understand how an outcome is achieved, this is the number of people they will need to treat in order to see that outcome achieved, whether it's the prevention of something or the resolution of something.
Right. So let's say I take you, Meredith, and I find that you have high cholesterol by the definition of the people that put the definition. Okay. So I want to give you a statin. So what does the data say? The data of the NNT is I have to find almost 400 Merediths to prevent one. Now, this is using their data. This is using the data that they allow us to see, right? I have to find one Meredith, almost 400 Merediths to prevent one heart attack. And I have to find more than 400 Merediths to prevent one stroke. But I only have to find 200 Merediths to cause diabetes. And I only have to find 50 to cause muscle damage. So where does and I cannot find any Merediths to prevent death. So oftentimes when I see people, new patients in my office, everybody comes either taking a statin or under the threat of a statin, like your friend, and they tell me, "Oh, my doctor told me I'm going to drop dead of a heart attack," and then I pull up that website and I show them the line: no benefit, no mortality benefit, zero. You're not going to drop dead. It's zero. It's all propaganda, So now, do I prescribe statins? I do. Never in primary prevention, ever. Now, there's some instances in which I do prescribe statins for secondary prevention. But even then, the data is I have to find 80 to prevent one. So it's not malpractice. It's not like I'm withholding a life-saving procedure by not prescribing a statin in this context. I still have to find 80. And then I only have to find 50 to cause diabetes. So, that's the kind of conversation I think that needs to happen between a doctor and a patient when you want to use an intervention. The statins are prescribed like they're candy. They're not. They're mitochondrial poison. They inhibit coenzyme Q10, which happens to be a very important coenzyme in the electron transport chain. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that was even worse than I thought it was going to be, and I knew it was going to be bad. So the metric that we're using to indicate the prescription of a statin in the first place, i.e. high LDL, is flawed.
It's flawed, and I can explain that also because I think it's important because this is one of the major things that doctors check, the lipid panel, and they focus only on the LDL, which is the wrong thing to focus on. Totally wrong. The reason for that is the LDL is, as it is measured, is the cholesterol that is inside a lipoprotein called low density lipoprotein. Now, it is true in the clinical trials at the beginning, specifically the Framingham study, the very famous, a high LDL in general gives you a hazard ratio of 1.3, meaning you have a 30% greater chance of having a cardiovascular event. LDL just made the definition of a hazard by 0.1, because the definition of a hazard by the WHO is anything over 1.29. Now, when you looked at triglycerides, the high triglycerides actually had a hazard ratio, I think, of 1.9, so way greater than LDL. But nobody focuses on triglycerides because there's no pill for that. But
I was going to say, because statins don't help triglycerides, so we won't talk about that metric.
Exactly. Now,
okay.
Now, there's at least two types of LDL. One is type A, which is large and buoyant, has a lot of cholesterol, and is found to be at least neutral, non-harmful. There is another one called type B, very small, like a pellet from a BB gun, and that, if you have too many of those particles, they can actually get inside the blood vessel and shear the blood vessel in the proper context. That wouldn't even happen if you actually were grounded and get a ton of red and infrared light, because your structure on the water, that's a buffer. So it can't get in there because it's buffering, and you're actually making your circulation better. Now, that's another topic, but just to have people understand, when you're measuring the LDL, you're measuring both. You're measuring type A and type B. One is at least neutral. There's some data that says that may be even beneficial. The other one is harmful. So how do you tell? You can actually do a test to tell which one, to differentiate type A and type B, but that's expensive and the insurances don't pay for it because the insurance wants me to give you the pill, right? So that they're part of the system. But a poor man's way is to do the triglyceride to HDL ratio. The triglyceride into the HDL, if that ratio is less than 1.5, then that means most of the LDL is at large, buoyant, harmless. So the number doesn't really matter. Now, if it's higher than that, then that is means that you have it's possible, it's a risk for heart disease, et cetera, but in the proper context. So it's not like a causation. It's always in the proper context. So why is that? What is it telling you? What is a high triglyceride to HDL ratio telling you? We go back to what we're talking about. It's telling you have insulin resistance and high insulin. I'm the only doctor in Rhode Island that checks for insulin. The only one. Even sometimes I check and I get the report back without it, and I have to call the lab because the people that draw the blood are not used to checking for insulin. So, and the reason I do that is I show my patients, look, I can't put you in a bucket. I tell them the cholesterol story as I'm telling you now, so they don't worry. But more importantly is the insulin resistance and high insulin, because that is the definition of mitochondrial dysfunction. So then we tell them, and that's really the reason. So to make matters worse, if I give you a statin, the statin lowers the type A of LDL and not the type B. So that's why
oh my God.
And it increases the insulin resistance. So you tell me the world we live in is like upside down.
So we're using the wrong metric. Then when we take the statin, even if there is an indication for it buried inside of the wrong metric, the statin doesn't help that, but it does make everything else worse that was likely contributing to the person having symptoms in the first place. That's
right. Now, statins do work in the proper context, but it's irrespective of cholesterol. They have been shown to
when do they work?
Anti-inflammatory properties. They work in the secondary prevention like somebody with established heart disease. Now, they work as not a solution. They work as a combination of other things like lifestyle / circadian alignment / sunlight / darkness at night. That's what really works. Now, you could put somebody on a statin briefly until you fix all that, but for the vast majority of people that are prescribed statins, there is absolutely no evidence that you do anything beneficial, and there's a lot of evidence that you may actually be doing harm.
Wow. Okay. So I'm just processing. Yeah, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe statins are one of, if not the most prescribed drug in the United States. Is that?
Yeah, I think at one point they might have been the number one. I think they're still top three or top three. Or, I think the antidepressant medicines. I think I may be wrong, but
oh God, there's another podcast.
Yeah,
the SSRIs. I feel like we could have a similar conversation about that.
Yeah, wow. I think the important take home is, well, I'll go back to the NNT, okay, and I'm in Solimar, and personally, I don't promote any particular diet per se, but what we do recommend is a circadian way of eating, basically, and eating seasonally, and I'm sure you've covered why that is the case with many of your other guests. But when you look at the same way of displaying data, and then you look at, I told you that you need to find, I think 80 people. I think that it's 80 if you give a statin to prevent a cardiovascular event in the context of secondary prevention. When you look at the same data, when they studied the Mediterranean diet, it's half that. You only need to find like 40 to find the benefit with no side effects. So what is that telling you? Lifestyle interventions, such as the ones that we promote, are way more stronger, at least in the context of what we're talking about, than any pharmaceutical intervention.
Wow. It's incredible. And like the good news is that the solutions are right there available, just to open our window and turn off the LEDs, throw on some blue blockers if we want to watch a movie before bed, right? Like it's not terribly complicated, and it does have the healing effects that we're looking for when we go to a doctor in the first place.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So I hear people say that you're your own doctor. Yes, we all are our own doctors, but we really need some guidance because there's so much misinformation out there that when you talk about, like you said to me, you're not big in supplements, et cetera. Neither are we. There's a place for all these things. I get it, but by far if you want the intervention that is going to build your mitochondria and keep them robust, is paying attention to our quantum biology.
Yeah. Okay. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to dig into a technical term that you mentioned, which is the relative risk versus absolute risk, because this is a ploy that the pharmaceutical industry seems to use a lot. And I recall what I'm thinking of specifically is the data around mRNA shots, particularly for children. Right. So the headline that was thrown at me in order to encourage me to give that shot to my children was there's I think it was a 95% risk reduction. Now, my husband, God bless him, he read the entire transcript of the FDA trials for that. And he did the same thing you did with the statins. And he was a 95% reduction of what? Mm-hmm. Right? What is the risk of COVID to a child in the first place?
zero. And this is
yes.
95% of zero.
Yes. So I just wanted to highlight that and hear your thoughts on it, because I feel like just dropping the relative and the absolute and using the word risk, we're getting played.
It's a marketing. It's basically a marketing propaganda ploy, right? And that's when I back in the day when I allowed drug reps to come in to visit, there's always a young man or woman, very very provocatively dressed, and then they show these beautiful charts, and they show you all these pie charts and all these graphs with relative risk reduction, and it's all basically aimed at the doctors. Okay, that's how the that's their aim, because they understand that we are the ones that hold the prescription pad, and they want us to prescribe. So basically, relative risk is so you take two groups, you examine an intervention. The placebo is never zero, right? I mean, the placebo always gets an effect. Maybe they should study why that happens. Theoretically, if the paradigm was correct, if you give somebody not the intervention, then you should not see effect, and that's not true. The placebo arm always has an effect. So what they do is, in the case of risk reduction, is how much the actual intervention, meaning the drug, decreased whatever you're looking for, heart attack, strokes, cancer, whatever, with respect to the effect the placebo had. Again, that's just examining two groups and presenting the data in a way that it's convenient to sell your product. Because what happens when they describe the side effects, they don't describe the side effects as relative risk. They describe the side effects as absolute risk. So see the game they play? So, and that's by design. So they market.
Okay. So when they talk about the risk of the danger if you don't take the drug, they use the absolute numbers. But when they talk about the efficacy of their product, they use the relative numbers.
Yes, the side.
And then they don't tell you that they're using different benchmarks.
Well, they do tell you, but they do tell you, but you have to have the criteria in your brain to understand. So that like we explained, most doctors are going to buy the dogma because that's the dogma that we have been.
Okay, so there's an asterisk, and then down at the bottom it says absolute risk on one chart, and there's an asterisk, and down at the bottom the other says relative risk. But the numbers that are big,
that's right,
make the comparison seem real, are taken from totally different data sets.
The relative risk for clinical trials is a marketing technique. That's it. Just leave it at that. And if people want to make informed consent, they need to know what the number to treat is for whatever intervention. We talked about statins, and they can fact check me. It's called the NNT.com. They and actually, I want to emphasize the point. That's the data that they allow us to see. There's a lot more data that they don't allow us to see. So that number might be even in the thousands. Who knows? I don't know. We can't know because they don't let us see it. So I think that's a take home whenever a doctor wants to give you an intervention, especially if they are as adamant as to tell you you're going to drop dead if you don't take this. Just go to that website. It doesn't have all of them, but it does have the major ones like hypertension and cholesterol and other things.
Okay, we'll put the link to that in the show notes of that, because that's really powerful information for people to be armed with. Just so, out of curiosity, what is a good NTT number?
Well, it depends.
What are we looking for?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that actually. I think it depends on
lower. Lower is better.
I mean, for me in particular, an NNT would be 1 for me if I was the patient. But if a doctor or you by reading, you've actually, you are concerned that the high cholesterol might take you out or whatever, And you want to take a statin, okay. An NNT of 340, whatever it is, might be good enough. I don't know. But the point that I want to make is this is what informed consent is. This is informed consent. That's exactly what it is. You need to know what you're taking and what is the downside. In the case of statins, for primary prevention, the downside is greater than any benefit that you could get. And you're not going to drop dead. There's no data that shows that you're going to drop dead if you don't take a statin in primary prevention.
Wow. This is incredible stuff. I really, and just to wrap up, like, do you feel like we're at a turning point in some ways? I mean, as we're speaking, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is in the headlines and is making all kinds of topics. As my son said, he's like, Mom, everyone's talking about all this weird stuff I've only ever heard you talk about, like fluoride in the water. Yeah. And so obviously, we don't know where things are going to go, but it does feel like there's been a little bit of a flip, a little bit of a shakeup. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Robert Kennedy Jr. I am. So I hope, I told you the statistics for the medical industry is $3.4 trillion. To that, you have to add big food and big agriculture. And on top of that, you have to add big tech. So, it's a tall task. I think this is something that I think is very difficult to fix from the top down. I think the way we fix this is by the people who are listening here demanding and taking matters on their own hands. And I see it. I get a reputation in Solomar now in Rhode Island where people come to me with all kinds of diseases. Like I'm the doctor that fixes things, and I'm not a magician. I can just coach them into things that I can support them with. But it's funny because the reason I mentioned that is I think there is now an awareness and a lack of confidence basically in the medical system where people are looking for a different perspective on how to deal with their health. And I think that's good. I think that's how we are going to change the world. And it won't happen. I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a start in the right direction. But it's going to take a lot more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So ideally we're coming from both directions, ground up and top down.
Right, exactly.
Hopefully we can meet somewhere better. I mean, there has to be something better than this. This is just an absolute travesty. Like what you've described here is insane and wrong.
And we didn't even talk about Ozempic.
Oh my God, I know. That, yeah. Okay, well, maybe we'll do a series. We'll do another interview next month. We'll do SSRIs, and then we can do an Ozempic episode.
Absolutely.
Francisco, thank you so much. As always, this was absolutely delightful. Thank you for the work that you do, and for leaving the system and setting up something new. I think that's the one commonality that physicians that I speak to who are making a difference, the main thing they have in common is that they work for themselves.
That's right.
There's one exception. There's a guy, Dr. Roger Schwelt.
Yeah.
He works at a hospital, but he seems to have somehow found a way to have influence and get to try things. I don't know how he did that, but he's the only one that I can think of.
Yeah, he's really, really interesting doctor. I listened to him. I listened to you interviewing him. He's right on.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't think has entered the physics part of things, but he totally, he's just looking at the outcomes from light, and it's like, why aren't we doing more of this? So super interesting. So tell us, do you see patients virtually as well?
I do. Yeah, I do. Solimar is a membership practice. So we do the only thing I can't do is prescribe medications, but we're talking about not prescribing. But,
right. Probably people are not going to see you virtually for that.
Yeah. So, But yeah, we
Okay.
do, that's for sure.
And you and your wife are also setting up a practice in El Salvador. You're both licensed physicians there still, and so you've got the two locations, Rhode Island and El Salvador.
Yeah, that's for the near future. We're in the final processes of how we're going to structure it, but it's basically going to be an arm of Solimar. So Solimar is going to sponsor this location here at the beginning, and then the idea is to be a hub for people that come here, relocate. As you know, El Salvador is becoming famous for not only health but decentralization, including money. So there's a lot of people from all over the world relocating here. So we want to have a hub here where we can serve as a bridge. We have a network of physicians here, friends, meeting with my classmates from 40 years ago. They're lawyers, architects, engineers, all kinds of people that we want to create this network where people can have a seamless experience if they decide to move here, and also be a hub for people like from the northern latitudes, so where they can get better or faster here than there. So all kinds of ideas that we have as to how to utilize Solimar down here. I think people should come down to El Salvador. It's beautiful. This is a way different country than when I left it, 30 years ago. Way different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like El Salvador is the new Costa Rica. That used to be where everyone moved, and now they're all moving. And not even like circadian oriented people, just people looking for a nice climate outside of the North American, European tax structure.
Absolutely.
Right. And I love that idea too. So if I'm just thinking, right, it's like somebody has a serious illness and they decide they want to be at a lower latitude for a certain period of time to do that reset that we talked about earlier. You and your wife would be set up to sort of help them find accommodations and make that work. And then you could, check in on them medically while they're there.
You got it. That's exactly.
I think that's a great solution, because I do hear people, they're like, oh, I'm going to rent a condo in Mexico or whatever. And then they get there and then, they start to feel better, but they're really lonely because they don't know anybody in Mexico. So then that brings up a whole other set of challenges.
That's right. And they don't know the language, et cetera. But
yeah,
most people that you'll encounter here, at least in the area where we are here, will speak English. I mean, they're not.
Yes.
They're not foreign to English speaking. There's a lot of really good things going on here, and it's a beautiful. It's beautiful. The landscape. It's like Costa Rica, basically. Costa Rica is only an hour's flight away from here.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
And so the website for that is solimar.com. Is that correct?
SolimarDirectHealth.com.
Solimar. So that's SOLYMAR. It's like light and sea in Spanish. Solimar. DirectHealth.com.
That's our website. We haven't advertised on the website what we're doing here yet, but soon to come, early next year.
Cool. Well, thanks for letting us know. And then I did just want to mention the website. So it's TheNNT.com. So THE, N as in number, N as in number, T as in Tom.com. And the landing page is quick summaries of evidence-based medicine. Find the review you need. Very, very helpful stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Francisco. Absolute pleasure.
Have a wonderful day. Take care.
You too. Woohoo! You made it to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploratory adventure into new realms. Your energy and support are building a different world, and I am so grateful to be on this journey with you. Take care, and thanks.